Dave, you were in Shotgun Express with some pretty famous characters.
Yeah.
Who were they and what happened?
I will tell you. The characters in the band were Rod Stewart, Peter Green, Peter Bardens, Mick Fleetwood and myself. And it was basically on the premise that Johnny Gunnell, the manager, wanted to make some money because he'd lost quite a lot on the P2Bs, obviously, and we'd all learned to play. Thank you, Johnny. But I think one of the most memorable moments for Shotgun, there were one or two, was doing Tara Bound's birthday party in the Guinness Air, and that was in Ireland in...
Lugalore? Lugalore, I think.
That's it, yes. Beautiful place. And we were flown there with all the beautiful people from Chelsea. I recognised a few of them from the King's Road, and they all seemed to be gathering there. And we arrived, and the Loving Spoonful were playing there as well with us. So it was a great opportunity to see the Loving Spoonful as well, which were a seminal band in those days. And it was an amazing party because all the Stones were there, all the Rolling Stones were there. Presumably some of the Beatles were there. In fact, the whole party was totally star-studded with 60s stars. I mean, I remember Rod coming up to me and he said, "Dave, we are stars here. We are stars here. We are mingling with the stars."
Rod who, Dave?
Rod Stewart.
Ah.
He was knocked out. You know, this was quite a thing to be at a party like this, and seeing them all, obviously, some of them getting very stoned. But it was beautifully done. The rooms were done with carpets and hookers, and it was everything beautifully done. You know, it was a lovely place. And then moving on from there, the Shotgun, we did the old gruel of the Flamingo all-nighters, and the Gunnells had the Ram Jam Club. We used to regularly play at the Montfort Hall, and we had that hit, I Feel the Whole World Turned Around Underneath Me, which charted quite high, which we didn't want to perform and promote at all. We hated the song, actually, so we just pretended sometimes we weren't going to play, and we just hid. And Johnny Gunnell, in the end, pretty well had enough of us, tore up the contract. Rod, by that time, had left after maybe a bit of trouble with Beryl and this and that. I don't know what happened. Never really knew what happened, but anyway, he left. And he was replaced by Phil Sawyer, an old friend, who stayed with us for about 5 minutes, and then he got a job replacing Stevie Winwood with Spencer Davis Group. So really, that was when the band fizzled out. When Phil Sawyer left, that was really it.
So what happened to you?
We all stood there on the road as the management took our transit van away and drove it away. Bye-bye van, bye-bye band. It was one of those old-style management. So we were all left on the road with nothing. And I felt sorry a bit for Rod, actually. So I went round to see Rod, cheer him up in South Kent. And he was fine. He seemed to be getting on a bit and hanging out with people. Next thing he rang me up, he said, "We've just dumped Jet Harris, one of my heroes, man. We'd like you to be the bass player." And so I joined the Jeff Beck group with Jeff, Rod and Roddy Wood. And I think Mick Waller was the drummer at the time, but they got through a few drummers. Then Mick Waller left because he was angry about some legal thing. I then ended up working with Mick again, with Cat Stevens. And I brought in my friend Rod Coombs, but that lasted 5 minutes. Jeff was pretty heavy-handed when it came to musicians. And it lasted a while, and I didn't really fit in. I never felt I fitted into that band very well. I think, maybe I was too much of a toff, I don't know. Anyway, that lasted a while, and then I got a phone call to go for an audition with Cat Stevens, and I got it. And then suddenly I was playing bass, reading music parts, off and running on a huge tour with Walker Brothers and Jimi Hendrix and Cat Stevens. They were on the tour. This was a fantastic tour, all around Europe. We did Sweden, we did Norway, did quite a few countries. paid appallingly, may I add. The pay was terrible. That's why there was a trouble at the end of that, and I was a real shop steward on that one.
What was Hendrix like?
Oh, Hendrix was great because I was big buddies. Always been, well, not longer, but I was big buddies with Mitch. Mitch used to come round to my flat in Eiffel Road a lot, and we used to compare notes and chat about what we're doing. I think I had jams with him with the Riot Squad or something. I think I used to jam with him. And Mitch and me after the tour, we used to hang out, and obviously Jimmy used to come with us. And we used to hang out in Sweden and go to clubs and things, and we were just mates. It was good fun.
Wow. So what happened after that? You've done the gig with Cat Stevens, and you know, were you going to record or what?
Well, no. What happened was we were being paid £8 a gig, and we had to pay our own petrol and hotels with that. So you work that out. There were some people much older than me, trumpet players and trombone players in the band. It was a big band, you know, music parts, everything. And I felt really sorry for them. And they couldn't send any money back to their wives and kids or anything. They were starving. And one night, me and Ray Russell, quite a famous musician now, he's a professor of music, great guitarist, and good mate of mine, and we took all Cat's clothes away and hid them under the stage before he came on. So he had no clothes, nothing, underpants, everything gone. And so he had to turn up on stage in the raincoat, glaring at us all, furious with us. And Ray and me were laughing away. We'd had enough. We'd had enough. And, you know, he fired us, obviously, and we got the MU because the management weren't paying us properly. So we got paid, and that was the end of that. But funny enough, Cat was a really nice guy. He had us round, and he asked us to rejoin the band and do an album and everything. I was absolutely amazed, you know. I was quite flattered. But he obviously knew that we were right.
So you were a loose end again, or
I was a loose end.
you got a call, I think. You got another call.
I got another call from Peter Green and Mick Fleetwood this time. They said they came around, we've been talking to Johnny Gunnell. We think you're, as Pete would say, a fucking good bass player, and we would like you to be in the band. And I said, of course, yes.
What was the band?
And that was the Fleetwood Mac. And so I said, yeah, great. And it was on, and they said, well, you better meet our new member, Jeremy Spencer. And Jeremy, cheerful, young guy, really full of enthusiasm and go, you know. I was really struck by his energy. And he hung around for quite a few days, and we talked about his influences, his sort of music he wanted to do and everything. And so got into the songs that we were going to perform. So that was all going along for quite a bit, actually. And then Mr. Auger rang up and said, Roger Sutts recommended you to join our band. He's just left to go and write the guy who wrote Hey Joe. And so, we need a bass player now. We heard you're quite good. So they sent me a whole load of parts, and I learned them. And he said, do you want to join? I'll pay you a good salary, and we're making an album, and blah, 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 blah. So I was still in the band, and it was the most painful decision of my life. And actually, when I finally caved in because of the money and the Brian saying, I'll teach you music, which was a load of bollocks, and never learned properly. And, I regretted that because I'd lost sort of something out with my friends, That was what but I had a great time. On the upside of it, I had a phenomenal time with Brian and Julie. Some of it was hilarious going into, when playing in Portofino, and then doing countless TV shows, and having countless girls coming into my hotel room was absolutely fantastic. I mean, I used to arrive in hotel rooms and they were always just sitting there waiting. I mean, what? So this is what pop stars was all about. Well, it can't be that bad.
How long were you in them for?
About 4 years. So it was a good haul. And the point was, unfortunately for everyone, the album that I played a session on, which I did very quickly, I'd learned all the parts for them, did a quick run through in Italy, Club, Vroom Vroom Club. Did it in 2 or 3 days, made the album. It was like in those days. And it went to number 3 in the charts. And but what happened was that a single, Save Me, I think, went a huge hit all over Europe. And Julie was just part of the band. And it was her picture on the sleeve. And sort of Brian Auger Trinity and sort of Barrow in the bottom of it, you know what I mean? So it caused it was difficult after that. There was mistrust from Brian, not to Julie. It's nothing to do with Julie, but it was to do with the management, which was Georgi Gamelski, and the record company. It was a record company as well. So was the information fed badly, or was it intentional, or wasn't it?
Marketing took over, perhaps.
Yeah. So it could have been. So there was that feeling there, and it coloured everything really. It was sad because we did fantastic gigs all around Europe, and, you know, in France, people screaming at the airports. The works, we had the works. It was
Bigger
great.
there than in the UK. You know?
Oh, 20 times bigger. Absolutely massive. And doing stadiums, the works. And coming back, it was a bit strange, you know. It was something, you're playing in some sleazy club or something, you know.
So ultimately that did end. But then you also came across other characters, didn't you, and started playing with
What?
Arthur Brown.
Oh, this was afterwards, when we did one tour with Trinity on the Street Noise album, which we'd made, which I think basically Jules, had decided she wanted to do her own music. I think that was really what it was. And she didn't tell us. That was really what upset me, because we just had a record that was going up the charts, we were touring Led Zeppelin, the real business. Led Zeppelin was absolutely on top form, and they were headlining the hit Winterlands. We were signed to Atlantic Records. We had the double album going up the American charts, and then Julie decides to quit. Bang, all gone. Something twinkling an eye, and we made, and she just left. That was it. It was very, very hard, and we managed to. It was a toss up between Gary Boyle or Andy, who now was guitarist in the Police, and Gary Boyle came back because he was a guitarist, and we did an album with Brian and on RCA, and it was not a very good album. In fact, it was bloody awful.
I want to pick up on your Led Zeppelin tour. I mean, observe Led Zeppelin for me as in their heyday, as their emergent.
They were in their
force.
heyday. They were in rampant form. I mean, they'd taken over the stage in America. The old bands, I was with my friends Judy Wong and Lynn, as friends out there, and they looked after me when I was in San Francisco. I used to go and stay there. And they used to take me to these festivals in San Francisco where you'd see the Grateful Dead playing with Jefferson Starship. And many people were naked, and just amazing sights. And the Hells Angels used to guard the hippies, thousands and thousands of hippies, on their bikes, so they could take their drugs and just be. And they would guard them, literally, and the police wouldn't come. So it was a whole culture was going on here, which was quite amazing. But out of all this, why I say this, is that all those free-form type bands, Jefferson Starr, which were blowing, you know. Beefheart were a blues band, but a psychedelic blues band. I saw these bands because I played with them, you know, at stadiums in various countries, so I listened to them. But they were very, very loose. And along comes this band of highly technical musicians who came in and just took over the game. They were phenomenal players. Jimmy Page, a staggering guitarist, and I think it's so sad he hasn't done anything since Zeppelin, because, you know, he is is probably one of the best. John Paul Jones, wonderful bass player, and Bonham, superb drummer. And the fact is that sometimes I've never seen a rock band, go from 5/4 and then go into 6/8, and you don't even know they're doing it, which shows the phenomenal musicianship this band had. And
some people say that, you know, you can look at the strands of British rock music, and one of the strands would be blues and soul, which I think Led Zeppelin took. But the other strand would be riffing.
Yeah.
Well, and maybe that culminates in Led Zeppelin.
I would say, in total agreement with what you say here, is that Zeppelin invented the heavy metal rock riff. And for that, they weren't the greatest songwriters in the world. There was no Lennon-McCartney there. There was no Ed Sheeran there. No. But they mastered the art of the heavy riff and used it to absolute maximum. And thus, other bands, Deep Purple followed, Black Sabbath, well, there are quite a few.
But the predecessor would have been Ray Davies.
Ray Davies, with the riff that he used. So maybe the glue from Hamilton to Ray to Led Zeppelin is there. It's an interesting thought.
And blend it with the blues side.
And the blues, which came from the Yardbirds, which were another band on a par with the Stones, which used R&B and blues, came and manifested itself in Led Zeppelin. The Stones, not so much, but they had some pretty hefty riffs as well. There's no doubt about that. And their origins, the Stones' origins, funny enough, was quite similar in the sense of there was Alexis Corner, who was, I think, quite a profound influence on Brian Jones and the Stones as well.
Would it be fair to say that this blend of the riff and the blues is really the British sound of rock?
Yes, I would say so, because you try to work it out why there were other bands like Bon Jovi, but they weren't really great riffers. Guns N' Roses are okay, but then suddenly you see Led Zeppelin and they stand head and shoulders above all those bands. They Guns N' Roses wrote a couple of good pop songs, but you know, so what? These guys were actually producing a new form of music, and that's why Zeppelin will always be there as an outstanding band in my mind. And where they drew from came from a long way back, maybe from those early days.
Thank you, Dave.